Well, hello, Alan. How's it going?
Hi, Sheila. Great to be here.
Are you as glad as me that this is all over?
It is a relief. It'll be a weekend off, and then I guess we'll move into drafting submissions.
Now, since you're a lawyer, I want to ask you, what was the one legal thing that stood out for you today? I watched this through a layman's set of eyes. For me, shocking once again that they're releasing documents in the middle of testimony of Justin Trudeau. Documents relating to his testimony were being released an hour into his testimony. What was the one thing for you that really stuck out today?
Well, what I thought stuck out the most, it happened in the cross-examination of Justin Trudeau by the lawyer from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And what she managed to do is to nail Justin Trudeau on the test. And on the test he considered when invoking the Emergencies Act. Because, Sheila, as you might recall, we all thought we knew the test that was being used to invoke the Emergencies Act. And then we got a surprise when we heard from the director of the National Security Intelligence Advisor and the clerk from the Privy Council. And then, I don't know about you, Sheila, but I was quite surprised when I heard the director of CSIS say that he recommended the invocation of the Emergencies Act when he was simultaneously saying that it didn't meet the threshold under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. So we were all confused by that test, and we wanted an explanation. And what were they considering? And I think that lawyer nailed down for the first time that maybe the context is the same, maybe the context might be different, the purpose might be different, the decision maker might be different, but the test is the same whether you're getting a wiretap under the CSIS Act or whether you're invoking a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act. And that was the big breakthrough that we've seen today.
Yeah, because for the last, I would say, 2 weeks, they've really tried to sort of blur the lines between what we all thought the bar or benchmark was to invoke the Emergencies Act. I think it was probably universally understood that it was Section 2 of the CSIS Act. And then that changed, didn't it? Once we heard, okay, CSIS said, no, it didn't rise to that benchmark, then all of a sudden we're trying to change the definition of the Emergencies Act to fit what the Liberals had done after the fact.
Right. And, you would read the CSIS Act, and then you would read the Emergencies Act, and then you try and figure out, is there some contrary intention in this Emergencies Act that I'm not seeing? And you read it over, and it's not just that, Sheila. You're trying to figure out exactly what is their position, right? You're trying to pin them down. And if you remember, David Lametti, the Minister of Justice, when he was testifying, he wouldn't talk about the evidence that he gave to cabinet, which we talked about before, and then fair enough. But how are we supposed to know what they really considered if we don't know that?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I thought was really odd. And it came, I think the lawyer, we talked about it just briefly, but I'll get your sort of legal opinion on it. I think it was the lawyer for the CCF who showed Justin Trudeau that entirely redacted document that he told everybody earlier in the day, you should read it, except he also admitted that he didn't read it. And then, so the lawyer for the CCF says, well, if we should read it, could you have your lawyer just remove those redactions? And no, they oppose the release of that document.
Right. I mean, that was a masterful moment by the lawyer from the CCF. Are you playing the clip, or should I comment on it?
No, you just go ahead and comment on it. We played it already, but it was kind of funny because it's scrolling slow and then, oopsie daisy, there's all the black.
Right. So, and I believe that one was redacted for, it was redacted for, I'm not even sure, I can't recall the privilege. It was most likely solicitor-client privilege, or to be honest, Sheila, I just don't remember. It's been such a busy day, but it was a type of privilege that I think Trudeau could waive, and he refused to do it. And and his lawyer objected, and objected rightly, but it was it did send a certain message, and it was one of those fun moments at the commission.
Yeah, let's show clip 4, another fun moment in the commission. If you think that your prime minister lying to you is fun. So clip 24, it's in and around the time that a deal had been struck with the convoy to alleviate some of the pressures on downtown. And Justin Trudeau claimed that he became aware of it. We've heard previous testimony that he was well aware of it. Cabinet knew about it. Several people have testified to that, including, his inner circle, but also police. And he said that he was advised that the agreement wasn't holding. But we didn't hear any testimony at all that the agreement wasn't holding. In fact, we heard from, city manager Steve Kanellakos from OPP that indeed they had moved 100 trucks in good faith, or 100 vehicles, in good faith out of the downtown core. So the agreement definitely was holding, but Justin Trudeau just decided it wasn't. And decried it as fake news. Let's show that clip, because it's really something else, because he's literally the only person who was saying that those trucks weren't moved. Even the craziest counselors said those trucks were moved. Let's go to clip 24.
And at the IRG meeting, you were advised that there was a breakthrough agreement between the Mayor of Ottawa and the convoy organizers to move trucks out of the downtown residential areas. Isn't that correct?
That is not how I remember it, no.
Okay, well, I can advise you that at the inquiry, it was confirmed by the documents your officials filed here and by witnesses, namely Jody Thomas. She confirmed that at that IRG meeting, you were briefed that there was an agreement with the mayor. Do you recall that?
With whom? With the mayor and who?
Some of the convoy organizers.
Which ones?
Well, Tamara Leach, who's present here in this room, signed a letter. It was made publicly available on the news on Sunday, February 13th, and you were advised of that agreement at the IRG meeting.
And we were also advised that agreement wasn't holding, and that many of the convoy had decried it as fake news and not actually an agreement that they would abide by.
And you learned that on Twitter, is that correct?
No, we learned that at the IRG.
By whom?
By our elected officials.
Thanks.
That's not what the official said, is it?
Why don't you tell us, Sheila? You've been following this so closely.
Well, it's true. That is, the officials never said that. They said, Steve Kanellakos, people from the OPP said, nope, they actually did move 100 vehicles, some of the big trucks and smaller vehicles. And I think one of our Airbnb friends there today, Tom Marazzo, was instrumental in doing those things. And it was, in fact, the invocation of the Emergencies Act itself that put an end to that, because it caused a redeployment of police to the protest.
That's right. It's really striking that, in Ottawa, things were really starting to settle down. Trucks were moving out of the residential areas onto Wellington. Some of them moved, some of them just left.
Right.
You'll recall that evidence. And there was a plan in place. Why was the Emergencies Act invoked at that time? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that it was invoked when that was happening in Ottawa, when things had settled down. The bridge had been cleared in Windsor. We all know that. We've heard that many times now. The situation in Coutts was, we know from the First Minister's meeting that it was about to resolve as well. They were about to take action, and it did resolve the next day. Right? So why then? That's sort of an unanswered question, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. And in fact, we know the situation in Windsor had resolved right then, because all those additional OPP officers were redeployed to Ottawa to deal with the convoy because Windsor had resolved.
Nobody is even disputing that fact. Everybody acknowledges that the situation in Windsor had resolved. You saw the note from the First Minister's meeting today. Justin Trudeau was commenting on what an amazing job the police did in Windsor. It was a complete success story. Dana Early, who was the superintendent, who was also a superintendent early, she's a member of the OPP. She was the critical incident commander in Windsor. she received an award for the job she did. And and afterwards they had all those concrete barriers in place, along here, I think it's called Huron Church Road. And so I don't think they had to be too worried about, they certainly didn't have to be worried about trucks blocking the Ambassador Bridge.
No. And that was one of the things Justin Trudeau said, even though these things were resolving, we still needed the Emergencies Act to make sure that they didn't remanifest somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. He seemed to think that the situation wasn't improving, which was, to me, that was contrary to the evidence. I think it was improving. And, the biggest concern was undoubtedly the Ambassador Bridge. And nobody is contesting that situation hadn't resolved, or at least the crux of the crisis was passed.
Right. Which leaves us with revoking or invoking the Emergencies Act because of inconvenience in Ottawa. Really.
Right. And, I think that it's very troubling. We heard a lot of evidence early in the commission about how the powers from the Emergencies Act were useful but not necessary. And a lot of this is just because of timing constraints, but nobody really challenged those witnesses on how awful that was. It is quite useful to take away people's charter rights. Yeah. I always think of the truck drivers because I think they were very much, the tow truck drivers, I think they were so overlooked because they were compelled to do something that they didn't believe in. It was against their moral beliefs. It was against their political beliefs. They were compelled into servitude, and that is so degrading. But it was very useful to be able to compel those tow truck drivers. And maybe that didn't happen. We heard that it didn't actually happen. They didn't actually have to compel anyone. But that's beside the point. That's what the measure allowed for, right? And that's what's so offensive. And I think it'll be a stain on our history. That's something that we just, we thought, well, it would be, that's something that Trudeau said today. He said it would be useful to be able to compel tow truck drivers. And at one point when he said that, he said, to fulfill their contracts, but it wasn't just to compel people to fulfill their contracts. It was more universal than that.
Yeah, it was to indenture those people as tools of the state. And I know Hatim Care from the JCCF really hammered the ministers the other day on that issue of, did you ever have any consideration for the charter rights of tow truck drivers that you press ganged into servitude against their will and often against their conscience?
That's right. He and I were talking about that throughout the inquiry, and we were trying to figure out, well, where can we get this in? And you only have so much time with every witness, and he did such a good job of that, and was so happy to see him bring that point home very clearly.
So, what's left to do with this commission? What are the next steps? Who's doing what now?
Well, so there are two major steps. So for the parties, like the Democracy Fund, the JCCF, Citizens for Freedom, we're going to be concentrating on written submissions. Now, perhaps you've heard some submissions today. They were 5 minutes each. Those aren't the real submissions. The parties were just asked to put something together to assist the commissioner, because he has a huge amount of work to do. And the written submissions are not due until the 9th, but I think this will help him to stay quite productive in that interim period. And there will also be a policy phase. And, Sheila, I think I'm quite worried about the policy phase.
Me too.
I think even if we had a favorable result in the commission, and if the commissioner said the invocation was not justified, we could get some very bad policy recommendations coming out of this commission. We've seen some of the things that the other parties want, right? They want to clamp down on what they say is misinformation. But that's a dangerous thing, because who determines what is misinformation? I think they're probably going to want to make, some people will probably want to make the Emergencies Act more flexible and easier to invoke. And I don't think that should happen either.
No,
What do
I
you
think
think?
it should. I think it should be even more clear and more difficult. And that is my concern too. Is they're going to see the recommendations of the commissioner, the findings of the commissioner, and then change the law itself to make it easier to invoke. And we're bordering on normalizing invoking this thing. We heard today that Justin Trudeau wanted to invoke it to deal with the pandemic, and the first minister sort of talked him out of it. And he couldn't be talked out of it this next time around, it sounds like. And so I'm very concerned about making this thing easier to invoke, because they haven't had even a moment of sober second thought. There's not even a single person expressing any sort of regret for how Canadians were treated in all of this.
Yeah, that's right. And I would actually like to see the act clarified.
Yeah.
Because when you read that section of the Citizens Act, when you read Section 2C, which we've been so focused on, it talks about acts of serious violence and threats of serious violence, but it's quite close to the definition of terrorism as set out in the criminal code. Right. And that's a very high threshold. And when we think about what happened in Ottawa, we don't think about that as terrorism, do we?
No.
Or most people don't. No. And if that's there were documents, there were Citizens documents, and that's how they kind of referred to that area. I'm guessing here that they just had their own convenient way of referring to it, and they call it terrorism and extremist violence.
Right.
But that's not what was happening. We didn't see that.
No. And I would like to see even that section itemized. It even feels a little just too vague as it is right there when threats of serious violence. I've listened to people tell me that honking is violence during this commission. So I would like to see that just tightened up with a few more specifics.
Right. It doesn't really help when we take a word and it sort of changes its meaning, right? It really waters down the concept, and we've been doing that for a long time, but now we see the effect it can have in real life.
Yeah, the real life consequences. Yeah,
I think you're right. We should clarify that. And there is a case from the Ontario Court of Appeal. It came out a little while ago, and I can't remember exactly right now. The name of the case escapes me, and part of the reason is because I'm just thinking about it on the spot. But they looked at the definition of free expression, and you might be aware, Sheila, that violence is an exception to free expression. Expression protects anything that conveys meaning, right? That falls within the ambit, right, but not violence. But the Court of Appeal judge in that case who wrote the decision made this distinction. He said, no. But when we're talking about violence, we're talking about physical acts of violence. We're not talking about words.
Right.
So there is some good precedent out there, but we got to make sure that it stays that way.
Right. I don't think we need the university humanities student definition of violence creeping into our legal system. Alan, I want to thank you so much for the hard work that you've been doing, and hopefully you can take a little bit of a breather as we move into this next phase, and just thank your family for letting us borrow you in the fight for freedom for so long.
Well, thanks, Sheila. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Olivia, let's go to an ad so we can let Alan lead the set, please, and we'll bring on Tom. Thanks, Alan.
Speaking with opposition leaders, the federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act.